What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you recently picked yourself up a Canon EOS R10 like I have as a backup to your R5 or your R7, or if you're first step in the mirrorless world from DSLR, or as most people are, they picked this camera up to be their very first wildlife photography camera. What you notice out of the box, it's not ready for that. It's not set up out of the box for wildlife photography. So that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to show you how to set this camera up, get the most out of it for wildlife photography, and you'll be pleasantly surprised once you start using it. So let's get after it. All right, let's get this camera set up. Like I said before, this thing out of the box is not set up for wildlife photography. It's set up more to go photograph your kids in the backyard and stuff like that. Now, two things we want for wildlife photography when we're doing it with these cameras. And the first thing we want is eye detect on an animal, no matter where it is in the frame. So we look through the viewfinder. We want to get it from corner to corner to find an animal going through the screen and find the eye or the body or the head of that animal and track it. And it's lock on and focus. So that's the first button we're going to set up. The second button we're going to set up is going to be single point focus. What we're going to do is we want to tell it where exactly we want that to focus. That way we could hit something behind a branch or on a branch or behind grass, or if we want to hit a part of the animal just to get to that focus plane. So those are two things we want. So let's get started. All right, so if we go into the menu, the very first thing we're going to change is on tab 1, we're going to make sure we set our image quality. So I shoot RAW. I don't shoot JPEG. The reason I shoot RAW is instead of JPEG is so I can go into Lightroom or Photoshop and have a full range of all the colors and all the shadows and all the highlights to change and correct or fix or enhance my image. I can't do that with JPEG. CRAW is fine also, but I've noticed with DxO Pure RAW, it processes a little bit better if you use RAW instead of CRAW. All right, nothing else I change on this menu. I don't change anything on 2. You can change on 2 your ISO speed settings. That's going to be, you say, hey, I don't want it to go any higher than 12,800 or maybe lower or something. I don't do that because I shoot manual. If you shoot manual, you don't need to worry about the speed settings because you're controlling the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter. And you can do that very easily with these new mirrorless cameras. So we're going to jump to tab 3, nothing we change there. You want to make sure your metering mode is evaluative. That's most we use about 90% of the time. It's by default there. Nothing on tab 4. Mainly because auto white balance in the mirrorless cameras works pretty good. And again, if I need to change it, I can change it in Lightroom or Photoshop. All right, tab 5, don't change anything here. Tab 6. All right, tab 6 is where you can set up the raw burst mode. I have a video for the R7. And I'll link it down at the bottom. I'll have a little hyperlink to it in the description that says, hey, if you want to know about the fast raw burst mode, you can go watch that video because it's set up exactly the same for the R7 and the R10. So let's just not cover that. Let's just jump across. All right, the next thing we're going to make sure we do on tab 7 is we're going to set the drive mode. What I'm going to set it to, so this is about 10 frames a second. That's 23 frames a second on the R10. On the R7, it's 30. And H, I'm going to set it to 15 frames a second. All right, so let's go down here to shutter mode. All right, I shoot electronic. A lot of people say shoot mechanical for no rolling shutter. You can. It's loud, as very, very loud. What I've noticed is if I shoot 30 frames, 40 frames, 50 frames, by feathering it and, getting that done, I might have 2 to 3 pictures that may have a little bit of distortion in the picture, a little bit of wobble. A lot of times it doesn't affect it. Maybe I'll have the log a fox is shooting on maybe a little wider instead of that. If you don't have a comparison image, a lot of times you won't know unless you get some type of little warp or a weird wing movement. But again, out of 30, 40 frames, I might find 2, no biggie. We had DSLRs we'd shoot that many, probably half of them would be out of focus. So being in focus and have a couple wobbles, I'll live with it, not a problem. Next thing I definitely want to change on this is release shutter without card. We want to set that to disable. The reason being is, forget to put a card in your camera. You go out in the field, turn the camera on, and you hit the shutter. It'll act like it's taking pictures. Guess what? You have no card. If you have this set here, when you turn the camera on, it will tell you no card in the camera. So you'll know right when you turn the camera on, you've got a problem. You better put a card in or go back to the truck or the car or the house or whatever and get you a card. This one will save you. Trust me. Tab 8. We're going to jump down here to image review. The first thing I do is I set this to off and viewfinder display disable. The reason being is you're taking a bunch of pictures, you're taking 10, 15, 20, just rattling off, and you take your finger off the button, it's going to try to show you the last picture you took. And it may sit for 2, 4, 6 seconds. Well, maybe something's still going on, or you're trying to feather those shots. If you set this image review to disable, you won't have that problem. It won't show you the image until you hit the play button on the back to review the images. And with me, I'd rather review the images when I want to review, not when the camera tells me, hey, here, look at your picture. Tab 9, we're going to make sure display simulation is set to the exposure one. And what that's going to do, you want it in the middle one. The reason you want that is that's how you look through the viewfinder. You'll see what the exposure looks like when you move your ISO, your shutter, your aperture. You'll see the exposure go up and down. You'll see your meter going back and forth. All right, optical viewfinder, we don't care about because we're not using it. We're using EVF, not the OVF. Shooting info display, I don't really mess with this. Just leave it default. Nothing else in here I change. All right, 10, this is movie. So this little setup's going to be in 2 pieces. The first part's going to be stills. The second part we'll do is video. So we'll come back to the video after we're done with all the stills. All right, we're moving to the purple menu for the autofocus. This is the fun part. The very first thing we're going to change on tab 1, we're going to change that AF operation. We're going to change that to servo. And what that does is if you're on one shot, you hit the focus button. Once it finds focus, it stops. And it locks the focus there. And if you take the front button, it stays there. And if you hit it again, it's going to find the focus again. If you're on servo and it's tracking something and you're holding the focus button down, it's going to keep tracking it wherever it is. So we want servo for animals for sure. All right, for AF area, I want to set this to single point. Why do I want to set that to single point? So this is going to be our first button we set up. And one of the buttons we set up in there is going to be metering and AF focus method start. So what that means is when I hit that button, it's going to execute the single point. And we're going to set another button later that's going to be the eye tracking. If we don't set this now and we use the metering, the focus and metering start, and we have animal eye tracking, all we're ever going to get is animal eye tracking. We're never going to get single point in this. All right? Subject tracking. When we're doing pictures, we're going to turn this off. The reason we're going to turn it off is that will always keep tracking. So if you have single point on right here and your bird is over here close to it, if you hit if this was set to subject tracking, it would have a little white box on the duck. And you've got your point, you want to focus here. You don't want it to focus on the duck because you're on single point. But if you hit the single point on there, that tracking's on, it's going to grab the duck where that white box is, not where you've told it to go to. It's one of the little quirks of AF tracking. It's really nice if all you care about, you never care about in single point, the subject tracking is fine. We'll set a button where you can turn it on and off later. I haven't really used it much with my R7. All right, the next menu we're going to do is subject to detect. We're going to set this to animals because we're shooting animals. All right, eye detection will be on, switching track subjects. If you want it to be more sticky on the first subject you do, and you got 2 ducks crossing or 2 birds crossing, you'll set it to initial priority to 0. I leave it on 1. It's worked pretty good for me. But if I do want it when let's say 2 birds are crossing, and I want it to get the closest bird after they cross. But maybe I'm tracking the one behind, but this one over here, as it comes across that one, I want it to switch to that bird. That's when you hit 2, because it's going to try to find the closest animal to it, and it's going to grab the eye on it. So you set it to 2. I leave it to 1. That's my preference. But you guys can play with it and see what you like. All right. Tab 2 is what case of tracking you're going to do. With the older cameras I use for the Canon R5, it doesn't have an auto, so I use subject tracking 2 method case. A lot of people are saying they like 4. So far for me, for everything I do bigs and I do smalls, autos work best for me, and I haven't had to change it. But play with these cases the best you can. I'd say 2 and 4. 2 is going to try when it goes behind something, it'll keep a track on it. 4, as you'll look here, it's people things that are accelerating are crazy. So really fast birds is what 4 is made for. But I found that auto works really good for me. Let's go to tab 3. Nothing I change here. Tab 4, again, nothing I change in tab 4. 5, this is where you would put your blinkies on. If you hit all this and do all this in here, and you say peaking on, what that's going to do, if you've got any blown highlights or anything too far too black in the shadows, like it's going outside your histogram, it will have little zebras and the blinkies on there. And you can actually tell it what color you want it to be, high red, yellow, white, whatever. So that's what that menu does. Next menu we're going to go to is the wrench icon, which is the gold icon, and we're going to go down to volume. So what this is going to do, this is going to be the shutter volume that you'll hear when you take the picture. And if you move it over to it, it will actually select into it. If you move it, see, it gives you a volume, how loud it's going to be. I set mine to 1 because when you have this thing up to your eye, 1 you can still hear quite well. If you want to completely silent, put it to 0. But if you're having a hard time hearing, then put it to 2. But I found that I initially started with 2 on this camera when I was testing it, and I've realized that 1 works better for me. All right, so that's the shutter when you pull the shutter button down. So the whole thing would change is the shutter volume, move it down to 1. All right, next thing we're going to do, we're going to go to tab 3, and we're going down to viewfinder brightness. And I go down here and set this to manual, and then I set it to 5. So what that does, it makes the viewfinder always the max brightness, because auto, it's going to try to sense the light and dim it down to 3. By default, I think it's 3. I'd rather have it at 5 to the max brightness, because that's really going to help you see in the viewfinder your exposure and what that animal looks like through your viewfinder. All right, nothing else. Let's look on 4. Nothing I change here. And on 5, this is where you would have your custom shooting modes. We'll get into that when we get to video. If you want to set something up to people and animals, this is where you would set it. You'd set C1 maybe to animals, and you'd save it, you register it, because all you do is hit here and register and pick which one you want. So like we can set to C1 for everything we set so far, that's saved. If you want to go back and change one to vehicles or people and set it to C2, you could. Now, that's what the custom functions are for. What I found with this camera, I'm not using the custom functions really. And when I get to video, I'll tell you why. Normally I use the custom functions really for video and things like that, but for this camera, it doesn't really work that way. Next thing we're going to is we're going to the orange menu. We're going to go to tab 3. All right. We're going to select customize buttons. This is where we're going to set up our back button focus. Very first thing we're going to do is change the way the shutter button reacts. And normally right now it's set to metering AF start. So what that means, you have to press it down. It's going to start the metering. Again, if you're in manual mode, who cares? And the next thing it's going to do is going to select the AF method. We have this set that to single point. So if we leave this where it is now and we hold it halfway down, it's always going to go to that method. It's going to be single point. We never would get animal eye tracking. And we want the animal eye tracking 95 to 99% of the time, single point 10% of the time or 2% of the time, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to move this to only metering start. So now we have hold it, it's going to do metering, but again, for a manual, we're not too worried about metering because we're setting all the metering ourselves through the triangle. All right, set that to OK. Next one we're going to go to is MFN button. All right, that's the one right next to the shutter button right up here up top. We're going to select that, and we're going to take that one, we're going to go one down here to start stop tracking. So now what we do, if we have hit that button, so let's select it. So now it sets that. So anytime you hit that MFN button, what that's going to do is going to turn the subject tracking on and off. And hit it once, turn it on, you'll see the little white box jump to an eye, and it'll tell you where it's going to track. So you know which animal it's going to track. What happens if you see a duck, you say you got 2 ducks next to each other. One duck has the white box, but it'll have 2 arrows around it. If you hit your joystick button here, and you move it, what that's going to do is it's going to jump to the other animal that it sees with the white box. All right, that's how you jump subjects in the same thing. It's pretty cool, but I have found that I almost never use it. Now next spring, maybe I'll learn I will and have a lot more ducks and can play with it more. The next button we're going to change is the AF on button. That button is right here next to the toggle, and it's right next to where we're going to set our ISO. This button's the one our thumb's going to be on 90% of the time, and that's going to be the animal eye detect of the focus system. All right, so select the AF on here in the menu, and we're going to go down to down one and over 2, which is the eye detection AF, which is autofocus. We're going to set that button there. Again, 95% of the time, that's the button you're hitting. Pretty simple. All right. We're going to the star button next. We're going to set this one to metering and AF start. So now, anytime we hit this star button back here, anytime we hit the star button, that is going to be the single point focus where we had it set. I just leave mine set to the center. Get my spot set, but you can use the joystick to move it around. That's all the buttons we're going to set in this. Let's back out of here. Now we're going to go one more down. We're going to customize dials. This one's important. The very first dial here at the top, this is my shutter speed. TV means shutter. AV means aperture. And of course ISO means ISO. We're going down to the next one, and this is the dial on top right here. Same as I said my R5 setup. So this has been really nice jumping from the R5 to this one because it's the ISO, the shutter, the two main things I use are set up the same. So let's click there, let's set this one, and we're going to change this one to ISO. Set it there. Now, from now on, my shutter is on this top dial, and my ISO is on this dial here at the top. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the ring here on the lens, this little ring here. Not all my lenses have it because my main adapter ring does not have it. Maybe I'll buy one instead because it's really nice at that. So this is where I'll put my aperture. So two places I'm going to change my aperture. One is going to be here. So let's go down to AV and set that. So now this ring here will be, anytime I roll it, it's going to be my aperture. All right, and I can turn that on and off on the lenses. The other way I change it is just using the Q button, the normal button, and on the back of it, I'll hit it and change my aperture on the back screen. It's that quick for me. Most times I set my aperture and I'm going to leave it there. I'm probably going to shoot wide open most of the time. Back out of here. All right, we've set up basically the stills mode on this camera. It's done. It's ready to go. We can go shoot any animals. We're not set up for video yet. We're set up for stills. Any stills we want to take, we're set up on it. Now, all that was done by putting this in manual too, by the way. So your options may change if you use something else, and I'm only going to cover manual on this. Set it in manual, use manual. I'll have a video on how to use it. It's pretty simple. Set your aperture, leave it. Set your shutter, leave it. And all you got to do now from on is move your ISO. So any other shot, so you set it up for whatever conditions you're in. You set your aperture up. You set your shutter speed up. So it's a bird. Say it's a duck. I'm going to set it to 1600 probably for ducks if they're flying in and out. I'm going to set my aperture at f4 or 2.8 or whatever the fastest I can do on my lens. If I'm just shooting a single duck. If I got a family of ducks, I may move to f8 or something like that, f4. But normally I'm going to be setting it probably f4. My big lens is back here behind me somewhere. And that's how I'm going to do it. So now, all I have to do is roll my ISO. Because I've got my shutter speed set, I'm just going to leave it. And I've got my aperture set, I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to touch those things. Now, if there's some other conditions happen, now I've got only floating ducks, I can go change my shutter speed and leave it for a long period of time. So from now on, all I'm doing is rolling my ISO and getting that histogram looking right where I'm not clipping my whites and I'm not shutting off my blacks. That's all you got to do. Okay, in video, it's a little different. In the video settings in here, you have to treat this camera a little different than you do the R5 and the R7. The reason is now the R7 may be the same way. I haven't looked at the menu for a while, but it's this high frame rate option. The only time you'll have it is when you have the dial set to video. That little camera icon, the camcorder icon. If you have it set to manual AVC1, C2, as I'll show you, let's just go back to manual. So we go to the menu on manual. What you'll notice on 10 is you don't have that high speed option here. You go into any other menus, C1, C2, AVs, that high speed option is not there. So here's how I figured how to use this camera. Again, maybe the R7 does the same thing, but I don't really remember if it did. And I don't have it because my R7 you'll see is over there on the top of my guitar case, that fender case over there. You can see it kind of barely in the shadows there. That's my R7, it's dead. All right. Now, so how do I overcome this? How do I make this work for me when I'm doing video? So the two things I want for video, again, I'm pretty good at having just two things, just keep it simple. All right, one is I want 1080p, 120 frames a second. That's one thing I want, so I get slow-mo. The other thing I want is 4K, 24 frames a second to do my talking heads and just normal speed video. So if I'm in manual, remember, stay in manual. I'm not going to show you the other modes. Manual is the only thing I'm going to show you besides the video side of it, all right? Because I want you to shoot manual. Is I go in here and what I'm doing is I have the options. When I'm in manual, here's what's funny. I only have 4K 30, 4K 24, 1080 60, 1080 30, and 1080 24 frames. I run mine at 4K 24 frames. That's kind of the more cinematic movie looking feel to things. So that's where I'm going to set my manual. Now, from here on out, it's going to remember those settings. That's what it's going to do. It's going to go to 4K 23. Now, here's another thing. You can't shoot this in manual mode in this setting at 4K 24. it's going to go in full auto settings, but it's going to shoot 4K 24. There's no way to make it do the 4K manual, or to shoot in manual, where you can set your aperture and your ISO and your shutter. It's going to pick all those things for you. That part's not real good, and I'll have to figure out a different way to do my 4K 24 when I want to set the aperture. That's the big one that I'm worried about. How are we going to set up to 120 frames a second? Well, we have to move this over to the video dial on the top dial. We're going to go into our menu. So we're in menu, and we're going on to tab 1, because this is all the video settings that are different than the still settings. So first thing we do is shooting mode. We're going to change that to manual. From there, we're going to go down to high frame rate. We're going to turn that on. So this is how we're going to get 120 frames a second. Now we can't do this on the other one, so we don't have that option. So now the menu settings we're going to have, the options we're going to have is IPB light and IPB. I shoot IPB. So we're going to do 120 1080 frames a second. Set that there. Next thing we're going to go to is we're going to look around here real quick. Custom white balance. What I do in video, I always set this to daylight. That's just me. Picture style can stay auto. All right, lens aberration corrections all on. That's good. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to jump over to the purple menu for autofocus. And movie servo AF is on. That's good. The next thing we'll do is make sure the AF area is set to all area. That's what we want, a whole area AF is the one we want, because we want it to track from corner to corner. Different than stills, we're going to turn on subject tracking. All right. What that's going to do is, so we want it to always track the subject. And then, because we're not hitting any focus, we're letting it autofocus all the time. All right. Subject detect. Again, set it to animals because we're filming animals. Eye detection enables good. Subject tracking, again, it's just like stills. Determine, do you want it to switch or you want it to stay on something? I just leave it in the middle. Nothing else I change in the autofocus. That's it. It's just on tab 1. So always set on that one's tab 1. We're moving on. All right, the next thing we're going to go to is we're going to the gear icon. And the first thing we're going to do is we can go down to power saving. So we're in video. We definitely want to use power saving methods because we don't want our camera to be turning off and changing these things. The very first thing is screen dimmer. I'm going to set that to, as long as I get it, disable it. Perfect. What that does is basically on the back of the LCD, when you're looking at it, if about 3 or 4 seconds, whatever you set it to, it will dim the screen. And we don't want that. We want the thing to stay bright so I can see what I'm looking at the whole time. All right. Screen off, disabled, auto power off. I'm going to set that to 10 minutes. Viewfinder off, disable. Because we've got it set to switch back and forth, so we're good. Screen viewfinder display, I want it auto switching. I didn't change this on stills, I forgot. So what you want to do is you're going to set this to auto switching. What that means is if you look through the viewfinder, the LCD turns off, and if you move this away from your face, the LCD will turn on and the screen viewfinder will turn off. So that's definitely one you want to set up there. Anything else we change here? I don't think there is. No, we are done. Guys, that's pretty much it. Camera set up. All right, now again, real quick recap. How do we use this camera? Take a picture, we hit the shutter. We want to change our shutter speed. It's the top dial right here. It's going to be that one. If you want to change our ISO, it's going to be this button right, this dial right here on top. So shutter, ISO. If you want to change the aperture, you can use a control ring, or you can use the D-pad and go into your info settings. Next thing you're going to do is when you want to, 95% of the time, use this camera, you're going to hit that AF on button. That's going to be your animal eye detect. It's going to look from corner to corner. It's going to find the animal. It's going to focus on it. If you have a problem focusing on the animal, or you're shooting something like a moose where it doesn't really find the eye, doesn't find the eye or animal, you can hit that single point. It can put it right on the bird, just like you do with the DSLRs or any other thing. So you just a single point, say, I want to focus right here. Shooting the side of a building, or you're shooting a tree, or you're pre-focusing on a limb, you know a bird's going to land on, you can use that single point, you can focus on that limb piece. And there you go. If you got an animal behind a piece of grass, you can focus on its ear, get to that focal plane, then use the eye of autofocus, or you can just leave it focused right there because it should be on the same plane as ear and its eye ought to be pretty close. All right, depends on your aperture, right? And how your depth of field is. That's pretty much it. Run the shutter, slam it. Go into video mode. If you want to shoot 120 frames a second, you go to the movie icon wheel on top. If you want to shoot 24 frames a second, go back to your manual. You're already locked in at 24 frames a second. Now again, that's going to be in auto mode. If you need to control manual mode on your video, you're going to have to go in there and change those settings every time. There may be a way to make a quick button, but I haven't found it. I haven't seen anything that will let me turn that high speed setting on and off. The only place I can find it right now is in the, if you're on the video dial on top, right? I'll also link down in the description, I'll link the manual to this camera so you guys can look through it. It's the advanced manual. It's got every little setting what it does. And I couldn't find anything in there where I could set custom 1 and custom 2 up for the video, because those two menus, when you go in there, there's no way to turn that to 120 frames. There's no way to set it to high speed video. And that's all there is to it that I found so far. If you guys find that, let me know. All right, guys, that's how you set up the Canon R10. Like I said, out of the box, it's not ready for wildlife photography, but after running these settings, you're going to find that that's going to be a pretty good baseline on how to use it. That's how I'm using this camera right now. Like, comment, share, watch the video all the way through. Leave me comments about what you think of this camera if you own it. Leave me comments about setup type tips that you had that I didn't cover, or something different that maybe worked better that you think in the field. I'd love to hear it. But until then, you guys get outside, run that shutter, and you guys stay safe.